She gave up her first-class seat for a scarred soldier. Is she crazy? Ellie didn't respond. She just saw a human being, not the Burns. Days later, military SUVs surrounded the farm she was desperately trying to save, piece by piece. One small gesture had opened a door that would change her entire life. If you had just one chance to be kind, would you choose to take it? Ellie Gardner, 29 years old, lived on an old farm in rural Georgia. She had never left her county, surviving on scraps of dry land and weekend farmers' market sales. The soil was stubborn, the equipment ancient, and the bills never-ending. But this was home. This was all she knew. Her hands were rough from pulling weeds before dawn. Her back ached from hauling water buckets when the well pump failed again. Most days she counted success by whether she had enough vegetables to fill her market stand. Her neighbors saw her as the quiet girl who never quite fit in, never quite made it out. Then came the unexpected invitation. Sarah, her old high school friend, was getting married in Seattle. A wedding invitation with a plane ticket tucked inside. Come celebrate with us, Ellie. It's time you saw the world beyond Georgia. Ellie stared at that ticket for 3 days. Seattle might as well have been another planet. She had never been on a plane, never seen mountains, never breathed air that didn't smell like red clay and fertilizer. But something stirred inside her chest, a whisper that said, maybe, just maybe. It was time to step beyond the fence line that had contained her whole life. She packed her one good dress, kissed her tomato plants goodbye, and drove her rusted pickup to the airport. As the plane ticket trembled in her calloused hands, Ellie didn't know she was about to make a decision that would bring an entire military convoy to her door. The airport was overwhelming. Crowds, announcements, the smell of coffee and jet fuel. Ellie clutched her boarding pass, feeling completely out of place in her simple cotton dress among travelers in business suits and designer luggage. At the gate, a miracle happened. An airline employee approached her with a smile. Miss Gardner, we're upgrading you to first class today. Consider it our gift for your patience with the delay. First class. Ellie had seen it in movies, but never imagined the wide leather seats, the warm nuts, the flight attendant who actually smiled when offering her champagne. She felt like she was pretending to be someone else entirely. Then she saw him. The veteran was boarding slowly, each step deliberate and painful. Half his face bore the unmistakable marks of severe burns, skin grafted and scarred. His left arm hung stiffly at his side. Other passengers glanced away, some with pity, others with discomfort. He carried himself with dignity despite the whispers. Ellie watched him struggle down the narrow aisle toward the back of the plane. The flight attendant pointed him toward a cramped middle seat in coach, wedged between two large passengers who were already making faces. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She simply stood up. "Excuse me, sir?" Her voice was soft but clear. "Would you like to switch seats with me? I think you'd be more comfortable up here." The man paused, confusion flickering across his weathered features. "Ma'am, this is first class. You don't need to—" "I'd be honored if you'd take it," Ellie interrupted gently. "Really?" Without waiting for protests from him or shocked stares from other passengers, she gathered her small bag and walked toward his assigned seat in coach. Behind her, she heard the flight attendant explaining the first-class amenities to her new passenger, his voice thick with surprise and gratitude. Squeezed between strangers for the next 5 hours, Ellie didn't regret her choice for a single moment. Seattle had been magical. Mountains that touched clouds, coffee that actually tasted like something more than bitter water, and Sarah's wedding filled with joy and laughter. For 3 days, Ellie felt like she was living someone else's life, someone who belonged in beautiful places with beautiful people. But Georgia was calling her home. The return flight was uneventful, coach all the way, and soon she was driving her pickup truck down the familiar dirt road to her farm. The vegetables had survived her absence, though they looked a little sad and neglected. The chicken coop still needed repairs from last month's storm. The fence posts were still leaning at dangerous angles. Reality settled back around her shoulders like an old, heavy coat. Bills needed paying. Crops needed tending. The bank had left another voicemail about the mortgage payment that was now 3 weeks overdue. Ellie rolled up her sleeves and got back to work, her Seattle memories already feeling like a distant dream. The encounter with the veteran on the plane became just that, a sweet memory. Nothing more. She had given up a comfortable seat to help someone who needed it. It felt like the right thing to do then, and it still felt right now. She didn't expect anything in return. She never did. For 2 weeks, life continued its familiar rhythm of early mornings, aching backs, and small victories measured in pounds of tomatoes sold at the Saturday market. Ellie Gardner was back to being invisible, just the way she had always been. She had no idea that her small act of kindness had set wheels in motion, big, military wheels that were about to turn down her dirt driveway. Saturday morning started like any other. Ellie was feeding her chickens when she heard the rumble of heavy engines. Living on a dead-end road, she rarely got visitors, and never anyone driving vehicles that sounded like tanks. 3 black SUVs and a military Humvee rolled into her yard, kicking up clouds of red dust. Ellie dropped her feed bucket, heart hammering as uniformed soldiers stepped out of the vehicles. Had she done something wrong? Was there some mistake? The last person to emerge was the veteran from the plane. But he looked different now. Clean military dress uniform, medals across his chest, and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. This wasn't the struggling man she'd helped weeks ago. This was clearly a career soldier. "Miss Gardner," he said, walking toward her with that same careful gait. "I'm Colonel Jack Carter, United States Army Special Forces, retired. I believe we shared a flight recently." Ellie's mouth went dry. Yes, sir. But you didn't need to." "Actually, I did." His voice was gentle but firm. "You gave me something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Dignity, respect. You saw a person, not a collection of scars and limitations." Behind him, soldiers were unloading equipment, lumber, tools, and supplies from the vehicles. Ellie watched in confusion as they began organizing materials with military precision. "Colonel Carter, I don't understand." "These men volunteered their weekend," he interrupted, gesturing toward his team. "When I told them about what you did, they wanted to help. We noticed your property needs some attention." Before Ellie could protest, the soldiers had split into efficient teams. Some headed toward her sagging chicken coop with power tools and fresh lumber. Others began straightening fence posts and stretching new wire. The youngest soldier, barely out of his teens, was already measuring her leaning barn. "We don't take kindness for granted in the military, Miss Gardner," Colonel Carter said quietly. "When someone shows honor to one of us, they show honor to all of us." As hammers began ringing across her property and the sound of saws filled the air, Ellie realized her quiet life was about to become very different. The transformation was incredible. What had taken Ellie months to plan and years to save for, these men accomplished in a single day. Her chicken coop went from listing disaster to sturdy fortress. The fence that had been held up by prayer and stubbornness now stood straight and strong, with gates that actually swung properly. But the biggest surprise came when Colonel Carter handed her an envelope. "This is from the Special Forces Brotherhood Fund," he explained. "We take care of civilians who take care of us." Inside was a check that made Ellie's knees weak. Enough to pay off her mortgage, enough to buy the new well pump she desperately needed, enough to plant twice as many crops next season. "I can't accept this," she whispered, trying to hand it back. "You already did," Carter replied with a small smile. "The moment you gave up your seat, you became family. And we take care of family." As the afternoon wore on, Carter shared his story. The roadside bomb in Afghanistan that had nearly killed him. Months of surgeries and rehabilitation. The long journey back to something resembling normal life. And how, until that flight, he had felt like a broken thing that people either pitied or avoided. "You didn't see my injuries first," he said, watching his men put finishing touches on the barn. "You saw someone who needed help. That's rarer than you might think." Before leaving, Carter pressed something small and heavy into Ellie's palm. A challenge coin, military tradition reserved for acts of exceptional honor. "Not many civilians earn one of these," he said. "But then again, not many civilians have hearts like yours." As the convoy prepared to leave, neighbors who had heard the commotion began gathering. Word spread quickly in small towns, and by evening, everyone knew that Ellie Gardner had done something special enough to bring the military to her door. The changes came slowly at first, then, all at once. Neighbors who had barely nodded to Ellie before now stopped to chat at the market. Church ladies brought casseroles without being asked. The local hardware store owner quietly told her that someone had paid her account in full. He wouldn't say who. Anonymous gifts appeared on her porch. Fresh bread, garden tools, envelopes containing small amounts of cash, with notes that simply said, "Thank you for showing us how to be better." One morning, she found a new mailbox to replace her rusted one, installed overnight by unknown hands. The local newspaper caught wind of the story and wanted to interview her, but Ellie declined. This wasn't about recognition or fame. It had never been about that. She continued working her expanded gardens, selling at the Saturday market, living her quiet life. But something fundamental had shifted. People looked at her differently now. Not as the struggling farmer who barely scraped by, but as someone who had chosen kindness when it mattered. Parents pointed her out to their children as an example of doing the right thing. The story spread beyond county lines, carried by social media and word of mouth. Ellie found herself becoming an accidental symbol of simple human decency. She hadn't set out to change the world. She had simply seen someone who needed help and helped them. But sometimes that's exactly how the world gets changed. One small choice at a time. Her farm, once isolated and struggling, became a quiet pilgrimage site for people wanting to restore their faith in human goodness. 6 months later, a handwritten letter arrived with military posting stamps. Colonel Carter's careful script filled 3 pages, sharing updates about his continued recovery and his new role training young soldiers in leadership and compassion. "You gave me back my faith in people," he wrote. "Every day, I try to pass that gift forward. I tell your story to soldiers who forget that we serve something bigger than ourselves. You remind us why we wear the uniform." The letter included photos of him speaking at military academies, sharing the story of a Georgia farmer who saw past scars to the person underneath. He had started a program called First Class Hearts, encouraging service members to perform unexpected acts of kindness for civilians. Ellie wrote back on simple stationery, her words as honest as her actions had been. "The barn still stands strong. So do I. Thank you for reminding me that one person's kindness can plant seeds in places we'll never see grow." Their correspondence continued. Two unlikely friends connected by a moment of grace at 30,000 feet. Carter would send updates about veterans he was helping reintegrate into civilian life. Ellie would share stories about her expanding farm and the community that had grown around it. As seasons changed and years passed, Ellie's small act of kindness continued rippling outward. Veterans from other states began visiting her farm, bringing their families to meet the woman who had shown their brother-in-arms dignity when he needed it most. Each visit strengthened the invisible network of goodness that had started with a simple seat exchange. The story became legend, retold in military bases and civilian communities alike, always ending the same way. Sometimes the smallest gestures cast the longest shadows. Final lesson. Not every act of kindness leads to a military convoy at your door. But every small action plants a seed, in the soil or in someone's heart. You might never see the person you helped again, but that doesn't make the kindness smaller. It makes you bigger. Some people don't need recognition. They just need to know that once they were seen, not for their wounds, but for their worth. If someone has ever treated you that way, share that story. Because kindness is a tree that always blooms in the right season.